So this is GCSE Biology. It's paper 2, unit 5, and it is talking about the nervous system. If you haven't already watched the first session on this unit, I suggest you go back and start there. It introduces some of the terms. We'll go through them a little bit quicker in this presentation, so I'd suggest you start there. You want to continue with this one, that's fine, but if you get lost, do go back and start from lesson 1. So this is the bit of the specification that we're going to look at today in terms of the structure and function of the nervous system and reflexes. As you can see, we've already covered homeostasis and negative feedback in a brief introduction to some of the terms, stimulus, receptor, coordination center, and so forth. Now we're going to start looking at the nervous system in a little bit more detail. To start us off, name the parts of the body and the receptors that are linked to each of your 5 senses. So in the previous video, we talked about the main senses, we talked about the sense organs, and we talked about the receptors in the sense organs. Can you remember all that stuff? Pause the video and restart when you think you've got your answers. Well, in the nervous system, you have five senses. You've got your sight, your sound, your taste, your smell, your touch. The body part or the organ involved in sight is the eye. The receptor is the light receptor. For the sound, it's ears and sound receptor because the cells pick up sound information. For taste, it is the tongue and chemical taste receptors. Smell is the nose, and they have also got chemical receptors, but referred to as chemical smell receptors. And then in touch, of course, we have the skin and we have the pressure, the heat, and pain receptors. Remember, receptors are groups of cells. So receptors are cells, whereas organs are the body parts. In terms of what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the structure of the nervous system, how it's adapted. We're going to talk about reflexes, and we're going to go into a little more structural detail on the different types of neurons, which links back to the first unit covering cells that are specialized. So if you've watched the previous video on homeostasis and negative feedback, this diagram should be familiar to you. If you don't have any clue where to start with this or the terminology involved, I'd suggest again go back and watch that video. The stages of homeostasis, pause now, have a go at missing answers, and when you're ready you can restart the video. So pause now. Well, in terms of a change in the environment, a change in the environment is called a stimulus. The cells, remember not the organs, the cells that detect those changes are called receptors, and there's 7 main receptors. You need heat, pain and pressure in the skin, sound, light, chemical taste and chemical smell. Remember again, you don't have to worry about the taste and smell, the chemical receptors would be enough on the exam. The CNS, or the brain and spinal cord, make up the coordination center, with CNS of course standing for central nervous system. The bringing about response is caused by the effector, and remember there are 2 types of effectors, the brain and glands, and a change in your behavior is referred to as your response. So now we're going to start looking at a reflex arc, and we're going to use the same pattern as we have been using with stimulus, receptor, cell coordination center, effector and response. Reflexes are fast and automatic responses with the sole purpose of protecting your body. The classic example is whenever anything goes towards your eyes, you automatically close your eyes. It's an automated response. You can override it. You can't force your body to keep your eyes open if you really put some effort into it. But these are automatic responses, the flinching and everything else, an automatic response to protect yourself. So let's start off nice and easy. So what is a stimulus? Well, a stimulus is a change in the environment. In terms of receptors, we have receptors are cells, so they're not the parts of the body, they're the cells found in the parts of the body, and you need to know all of them. So again, go back over those folks until you can do them from memory. The coordination center, again in the previous video we mentioned the coordination center. We have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. We also have the peripheral nervous system, which is all the other nerves in the body, but we don't generally use that at GCSE. The reflex does not involve conscious thought, it is automatic. It is also super fast. Because of that, it involves the spinal cord, the brain is not involved in there. So in the GCSE exam, if it talks about a reflex and describe the sequence of events in a reflex, do not mention the brain, only refer to the spinal cord. So in terms of the diagram we're building up to show the reflex arc, we've got our stimulus, we've got a receptor, and the stimulus and receptor will be very specific in the exam. They'll give you an example of maybe an animal making some noise would be the stimulus, the receptor cell would be sound receptors. If there was something moving or shining a light, then the stimulus would be the light and the receptor would be the light receptor. So make sure you pick the right light receptor for the right stimulus. But the coordination center is always going to be the spinal cord. Now, how does electrical impulses travel along and between parts of the body? Well, if you cast your mind back to the very start of the course, you should have covered all the different types of cells, you should have covered differentiation, and you should have covered a specialized type of cell which carries electrical impulses called a neuron. Now, there are 3 types of neurons. They are named dependent on where they are in the sequence. They always go in the same order. We have a sensory neuron, a relay neuron, and a motor neuron. The sensory neuron always connects the receptor cells to the central nervous system or coordination center. Remember, the coordination center or central nervous system is the brain or the spinal cord. In the case of a reflex, it would be the spinal cord. The relay neurons are the neurons found inside the central nervous system or inside the coordination center. The motor neurons connect the central nervous system or coordination center to the effector. Remember, effectors are the glands or the muscles. So now we have our diagram again for reflex. We've got our spinal cord and our coordination center because again, this is a reflex, so we'll only ever use the spinal cord. We've added in effector and response. We've now got the three neurons. So between the receptor cell and the coordination center, electrical impulses travel along a sensory neuron. In the coordination center, the electrical impulses travel through relay neurons, and then to get from the coordination center and send information to the effector, we're going to have motor neurons. Quick quiz, 5 questions, pause the video, have a go, see how you get on. Pause now. So question 1 is name the cells that pick up change in the environment. Well, they're called receptor cells, and you should be able to give seven examples. Names given to changes in the environment is a stimulus. The coordination center in a reflex, remember in a reflex it's the spinal cord every time. 3 neurons in order is the sensory, the relay, and the motor neuron. And the job of a reflex is for protection of your body. So this is what a neuron actually looks like. This specific one is one you're going to need to be able to label for the exam. And the most likely parts they're going to mention are the axon along the middle or the myelin sheath. They can't ask you about any part. Remember, this is a cell, so it does have a nucleus. It's a very odd looking cell, but it does have a nucleus just like most other cells. We have the very, very tiny little projections on the end on the left-hand side called dendrites, which then lead into sort of thicker parts called dendrons. The electrical impulse then travels all the way along the axon, heading inside the myelin sheath, and then we get to the nerve endings. So how is this thing adapted to its particular function? Well, you've got to explain. Remember, explain means why. So to explain, you've got to say why each of these things make a neuron really good at being a neuron. And remember, a neuron's job is to carry electrical impulses from one place to another. So pause the video, have a think. What makes these structures really good at making a neuron carry information from one place to another? So there's 3 main things when it comes to what makes neurons really good at being able to carry nerve impulses. And it's the fact that they're designed to speed up the impulses, to carry the messages a long distance, and to connect to many different neurons or effectors. Well, the part that makes it really good at speeding up impulses is the fact that it's got a long axon and it has a fatty myelin sheath. And it's the myelin sheath around that axon that really makes the difference. To carry messages long distance, again, it's because the axons are long, and that means they can carry them as far as they need to get the message up and down your entire body. And then we've also got the fact that it has dendrons and dendrites and even nerve endings at the other end in order to make sure that it can connect to lots and lots of different effectors and neurons. So between each of the neurons, so between the sensory neuron and the relay neuron, and between the relay neuron and the motor neuron, you have a little gap referred to as a synapse. And you need to know what happens at a synapse. And what happens is that at one neuron, for example, the sensory neuron, an electrical impulse travels to the nerve endings at the end of the sensory neuron. That causes a chemical called neurotransmitter to be released. The neurotransmitter diffuses across the gap, which is the synapse itself. So it diffuses across the synapse to another neuron. So if the first one was a sensory, the next neuron in the sequence is a relay neuron. And then what happens is that at the relay neuron, a new electrical impulse is activated because the neurotransmitter has bound onto that particular neuron. So we're back to our previous diagram. Again, we started with the sequence stimulus, receptor, coordinator, effector, response. We said in a reflex, the coordination center is always the spinal cord. We then added in our 3 neurons, our sensory neuron that connects the receptor cell to the coordination center, our relay neuron in the coordination center, and our motor neuron which connects the coordination center to the effector. And the last bit we mentioned was the fact that between each of the neurons, so between the sensory and relay and between the relay and motor, we have this little gap referred to as a synapse. And the synapse, we also mentioned how they work in terms of neurotransmitter diffusing across from one neuron to another to activate an electrical impulse in the second neuron. So time for a quick quiz. 5 questions, pause the video, have a go, and when you're ready, come back and check your answers. So pause now. So question 1, name the gap between 2 neurons. Well, that is a synapse. Name the chemical that moves between neurons is neurotransmitter. Name the center part of a neuron that carries an impulse. So the electrical impulse travels along an axon. What type of impulses travel along a neuron is of course electrical impulses. And what do the brain and spinal cord make up? Well, the brain and spinal cord make up the central nervous system, which acts as a coordination center. Lastly, just to finish up, we used a lot of terminology during this session, so have a look and see if you can work out what each of the 10 words are. Pause the video, and whenever you're ready, you can restart it and it'll go through the answers for you. So pause now. Well, number 1 is a sensory neuron, number 2 is a neuron, number 3 is a reflex, 4 is the brain, 5 is the spinal cord, 6 is a receptor, 7 is an effector, 8 is a response, 9 is a stimulus, and of course 10 is an impulse.